And David, let me know if any of these questions were already asked, because I know we're getting kind of a master list that came in from the production team. So let's start with Simone here. And I actually have my own specific question for Simone that I want to start off with. And let's have this first question be a panel session, and then we'll go into the rapid fire, because this was a little bit of breaking news last night. So Rohan Gray on Twitter had mentioned regarding Rashiba Tlaib, who's one of the congressmen, I believe, let's see, from Michigan, 13th district, and getting well known within the public discussion. You know, she was touting a stable coin tethering and bank licensing enforcement act. And essentially, a lot of people were concerned over in KarmaDAO that this would have grave repercussions for things like MakerDAO, with DAI and with Tether and with USD. Well, it would be good for USDC because they're technically the only, legal stablecoin. Basically, if you're not a regulatory approved stablecoin, then you're breaking the law, is what this act comes down to, or the interpretation of it. And Sam, we were talking about with some of your project regarding the volatility of DAI and the volatility of certain coins becoming more stable, like and Paul and Cyber5, there may be some relations to stablecoin usage. I mean, stablecoin's important to crypto in general, because it's almost like stimulus for Bitcoin at this point. Tether has been a major influence on price action and stability within the crypto space, and the ability for people to get in and out of different things. So it would definitely change the economy. So I want to start with Simone here on what your interpretation. Obviously, I may not expect you to have read this already, but it's probably circling in your circles. What is your interpretation if we have some sort of law come down from the United States that could impact the international market in regards to stablecoin and Tether specifically? What detrimental and positive attributes do you think that this would cause? And then we'll bounce out to Sam and Gerald and Paul.
Okay, well, certainly. So I actually saw the article pop up on my New York Times app last night. I didn't get to read it in full, but considering the quick summary that I skimmed through, it can have some negative implications, I think, for the US market, and particularly persons on the retail end who are looking to get into the crypto space. As you rightly said, stable coins can be at a bit of an entry point, say the gateway to other cryptocurrencies and other altcoins that are sometimes difficult to get on traditional exchanges. So you would get in through the stable coin, and then you have some sort of trade execution on a platform that would allow that. The draft, I haven't read the draft either, if there's a draft out, but this is one of the areas where, alluding to in my presentation, that is important for the community to have the dialogue. Because one of the things that's happening, the regulators in the US are there are many regulators in the space, but one of the challenges is that if you have something that stamps out innovation, and it may be that there's not a full awareness of the unintended potential consequences, then what happens is that the stablecoins will continue. They just won't be available to the United States market if the law is passed. And what happens is then you will have more of the digital assets being transacted outside. So it will be ex-USE. And that's one of the discussion points that I think will be generated by this particular draft piece of legislation, because there are already a lot of cries for regulatory clarity within a number of jurisdictions, the United States being one of them. And it's definitely an area that I think would benefit from more engagement from the crypto community to set out what some of these challenges would be if something like that is to pass. For persons that sit outside of the United States, other jurisdictions are going to look at what is happening, and there are some that are very progressive and will very likely not take the same stance, because they do want to encourage innovators, and there's a recognition that there's more dialogue that's necessary. So those are my views in terms of that congressperson's initiative in terms of the draft legislation, and where the crypto community could really help in terms of shaping the discussion on that.
Okay, and before we move on to Sam, how do you think platforms like Uniswap, even if they delist USDT as a whitelisted pair, even if they delist it as a whitelisted pair, you'll still be able to trade it on it. It's an autonomous non-custody solution. Do you think regulators come down on Uniswap and say, hey, you need to stop, you need to, force these people to stop using almost like a blacklist as pair, so they can't trade it? I think you're muted.
Yep.
Simone, can you hear me?
Oh, I thought you were asking that for Sam. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'll move on to Sam next, but I want to hear just your kind of a follow-up take on that.
Well, I think, again, it's one of the areas that more discussion is necessary. There's a lot of attention on Uniswap because, well, let's just face it, Uniswap has a lot going on, and it is definitely one of the platforms that DeFis have gravitated towards. The focus is for the key stakeholders behind Uniswap to actually have maybe some lobbying is an approach, because you're operating almost without that engagement. And at times, if you have other parties that might not necessarily be aligned with Uniswap's mission, they may create FUD in the space. So I don't want to speak out of turn, because there's a lot of attention on different types of platforms and what should be done with them. But it's important for the principles behind Uniswap to actually do a little more and make sure that they're a little more vocal in terms of, one, ensuring that people understand what's happening, including regulators, including congressmen and women in the United States, including the international community. But two, make sure that they address their minds to say, we understand that some persons might see this as too risky, or, it's just something that shouldn't continue. Have that discussion and actually not try to hide behind particular messages. Just address the message head on. And I think that will go a long way in terms of, I don't want to say alleviating pressure, because the pressure won't leave, but maybe changing the direction of travel.
Amazing. And then let's pass it out to you, Sam, to follow up.
So one, I want to make a distinction between House bills and Senate bills. So there's going to be a reconciliation process, and that's just how the Congress works. Two is in the United States, this is often a state issue. So there's not a federal. So this would necessitate instituting a new federal agency or giving those regulatory powers to an existing federal agency like the Department of Treasury, like FinCEN, or the CFTC or SEC, because there's no national banking regulator per se. There's the FDIC, of course, but they don't regulate money transmission and money brokerage services. That's a state-by-state issue. So even then, this is not a small ask, right? This is actually a fairly big ask in terms of, are they willing to get this passed through a Republican Senate? Having said that, like Simone was saying, lobbying is crucially important. I'll just mention Sam from FTX, the CEO, is like the second highest contributor to the Biden campaign for like $4 million. That gets you some attention. There's also Coinbase and Circle have a center, that's CENTRE, which is also supposed to be responsible for USDC. They do lobbying as well. Messaging your congressional representative or senator is also always important, because they hate hearing from their constituents. So if you bother them, they will have to listen to you. Those are, things that you can do without spending a lot of time or money. Just sending an email, or if you really want to be annoying, a fax. But those are like certain things that you can do. And then Simone had touched on being involved with regulators. So I've actually approached the CFTC back in February through their program called Lab CFTC, which is where they're trying to outreach towards fintech applications. So it's not just blockchain. This was actually in regards to an early prototype of Evo protocol. They had basically told me they don't give legal advice. So But the way I understood it was, as long as I'm operating within the confines of one state, it's not a federal issue. So I don't want to say, there's like, I'm not giving legal advice either. And I'm not a barrister or solicitor, but there are ways of operating, within the system, within, the current regulatory regime, which is crucially important because it's much harder to get rid of established businesses that are generating tax revenue versus a startup that is, potentially disruptive, right? Uh, so with Uniswap, though, I would look at like the Ether Delta SEC, lawsuit that happened and the resolution to that. It's not just because you launch a decentralized protocol does not absolve you of responsibility. So having said that, uh, find a good lawyer.
Yeah,
Find a pretty good lawyer.
yeah, maybe we can, maybe after we get through Gerald and Paul, we can also talk about how we feel about Uniswap in terms of KYC. A lot of these platforms that are launching on Uniswap, they're launching to US facing customers, and that seems to be a direct violation of Reg D under the SEC. For the most part, people just they're fine following it. And again, I'm not a financial advisor either and all that stuff, but you're fine if you follow right. My interpretation from the lawyers I've spoken with is you're fine if you follow Reg D, but you should also eventually file for it. And that's kind of the fly by night guidance that legal advisors will most likely give. And maybe we can come back to Simone and get some context on that. But at the end of the day, if you're launching on Uniswap and your wallet is connected directly through an LP, what's the function that they use on Uniswap? Approve, it's transfer, whatever, you're transferring directly to approve your Uniswap contract to add LP initially, then you're pretty much, you got your fingerprints all over the crime when it comes to Reg D. Let's move on just real quick, and we'll come back to that in a second because I think that's a broader subject that people are going to want to hear about. But Gerald, do you have some context to add on to this discussion?
Obviously, like hitting back on the stuff that we discussed like earlier in terms of like automation and how manual everything is right now. Like for me, I think that this is really just really bad in terms of just me seeing how far away these people are from understanding what they're doing, and I think like one of the best indicators of that is them saying that preventing cryptocurrency providers from repeating the crimes against low and moderate income residents of color traditional big banks have is critically important. Like this is so far away from like reality. It's like I'm reading like a fanfic basically on on finance. Like it's literally like I don't know even how to process this in terms of you got to be very self-involved with like very local things, let's say, right? If we look at the world, right, and the cryptocurrency market kind of evolving and creating like a whole new architecture, whole new layer of finance across the globe, putting this out and putting a statement out there, as literally, what basically the U.S. has a monopoly, right, in terms of financial regulation is just true, right? And they do everything to keep that monopoly continuing the way it's going right now. And this again is putting something out that I guess in their eyes somehow makes sense, but because they're putting it out, it overreaches over the whole ecosystem that is literally global. It's not about literally. It's not about the U.S. It's not about like local problems of crimes against. Like even this statement doesn't make like any sense at all. Like DeFi is literally allowing those all those residents, and like cryptocurrency is all about allowing people to access finance in a way that the big banks and US in particular have been making it hard for people to actually use these. Use digital banking even, right? There's so much they can actually do in the US, without touching the cryptocurrency stuff, to actually make it easier for people to actually to access, financial products. And me seeing this, like there's one topic, is discussing how ridiculous this is. And on the other side, there's just technical implications that make this not only like not possible. Like I don't see how this in any way is actually possible to implement at this stage. Again, like we're literally in the stone age of using these DeFi products, right? And it's miraculous. It is wonderful. Like I love it personally, but there's such a long road to go to make this accessible actually to the mainstream and for proper adoption. And them talking about these stable coins here in a way that this is something you can do, this is something that you can do, where we see that the evolution of these stable coins and how USDC came and how other projects are implementing stable coins and allowing for broader adoption of these stable coins into the market, how they drive DeFi right now. Basically just on the technical level, it makes literally no sense. I personally,
Yeah.
like obviously you see that I'm pretty emotional about this, but yeah.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, it's funny because Simone said, that she would be sure that some people would be championing this. And when you look in the DeFi community and the crypto community at large, we're so against it because we know the repercussions and we know what's at stake, right? But if you look into that tweet that was put out, which is a mainstream tweet, is being put out by someone who works at it looks like Stanford. The people in the comments were championing this, right? It's a complete opposite narrative that's coming out of the mainstream, which isn't surprising to a degree, but it's people like, oh, this is amazing. This is the next step that we need. And a lot of people that have been pouring blood, sweat, and tears into this space for the last decade, some of us here on this call are in the complete opposite camp of that. We think that this is the worst thing that we've ever heard. This is an abomination. What, like, we've been building this, like, who's listening to us? And it's so tone deaf, which is no surprise for politicians. But Paul, I want to give you an opportunity here to come in and kind of finalize the thoughts, and we can move on to the next topic.
Yeah, I'm an ex-banker, right? So I spent 18 years for my sins in the banking industry all around the world. And Simone, I wasn't here earlier, but I noticed a hint of a Caribbean accent there. I spent a year in Barbados as part of my travels as well. And I look at these kinds of actions as coming from a place of fear almost. It's the regulators looking at the way the ecosystem is maturing and going, we can't control this really. And the only way we can control it is to go, oh, well, hell, there are these things called stable coins that are ostensibly backed by the currencies that we do control. So let's find a way to try and control them. Now, I haven't read the tweet in detail. Whenever I see a regulator opining on crypto or stable coins or DeFi or anything like that, my eyes kind of glaze over. I'm reminded often of some of the first congressional hearings that Mark Zuckerberg attended, although no peace be upon his name, so let's not go into that, about some of those 85-year-old senators kind of asking him, what is it like? And, you just think to yourself, some of them are some more younger people are coming into regulatory roles. Where I live here in South Africa, the average age of our cabinet, as it's called, is probably, I don't know, 63, 67, something like that. These are all people who, grew up with a typewriter. I mean, Sam made a facetious comment about a fax machine, which made me giggle. Fax machines were like high tech, dude. I mean, that's like next level stuff. So I don't believe they really know what they're talking about. Some smart intern's given her a position paper and she's gone, oh, people are actually abusing our currency in a crypto world. And I always remind people that the currency that most crime is committed in still remains the US dollar. And I'd love to know how many billions are still buried in Colombia. from Mr. Escobar. So I'm the kind of anti-regulatory guy who comes from I'm regulated as a bank treasurer in 3 separate kind of financial jurisdictions. So trust me, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, have no time for it.
Did you get your AOC Tax the Rich t-shirt? $60 on our website?
Regrettably not. I'll have to check it out.
The
socialists are the socialists are my particular favorite. Don't worry. Let's just retire all student debt. Stop.
I do hope I do hope I get that 50K write-off from Biden. That would go a long way.
Man. Take it and run, but don't worry, your future will cry when it sees when that bill comes in. You know what I mean?
Well, I have Bitcoin, so I think I'm good.
True story.
But but yeah, I mean, when I saw that come out, I went to a state school because I may be one of the few people at the time who was under the age of 25 who thought, here's a novel idea. How about I keep my student debt to less than 1 year of expected income from my starting job? So I went to school for computer science. The starting average salary was 60K here. No one told me it would be 50K. But yeah, that's a different that's a different thing. A little bit different for you where you are, Sam, and the prices are higher. But out in the Silicon world, balling out. But I was conservative, but still, that even with a job, and now I pivoted to being full-time crypto and in the finance space and doing well off. Back when I had bought my house, that extra $500 that I was paying out to the federal government, that I can't bankrupt at all. I still owe that money regardless of what happens. That was a lot, right? And obviously you're given that opportunity, but when you get out of school, there is a whole generation that is pretty much under that weight of student debt. Yeah, it's at their fault, their own, but it's also a massive bubble, right? So,
sure.
To bridge socialism to that, it's a far reach. The government, dating back at least for the last century, has always been selective on certain social programs, and I think democratic capitalism does that fairly well. Medicare, other things that we spend a ton of money on, and I know Sam's a libertarian, so I'm sure he can go off for all he wants.
I am too, by the way. So Sam and I.
Yeah, I used to be part of the crowd. Now I'm a centrist. I think it's a better look because libertarianism has been hijacked to a degree, and I think that there's a middle ground. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. We can bring you in here.
No. Go right ahead.
Yeah, preach on, brother. All right, let's
preach, brother Matty.
Preach, brother Matty. Let's do the rapid fire questions real quick, so we can get them out of the way. I know some of the people on social media wanted their questions answered, and then we'll hand it over to David for the next panel question. So let's try and keep all the answers for these brief. We'll go through each person for the questions. We got a lot of questions out for Bahador, so there's only one left. And Sam Manifold got a lot of time, so I want to give some more time to Simone and Cyberfi. So let's start with Simone. And David, correct me if these were already asked, because we were given a master list. Due to compliances, the profit margins of the projects will decrease. Is this true?
Short answer is yes. Long-term answer is no. One of the problems that people have is that compliance is an afterthought. And because it's an afterthought, just as any project, if you're building a protocol and you forget that you need a bit more coding and you have to go back and embed the code, it's going to cost you more. So consider compliance as the same thing. If you don't build it up front, it's going to cost you more in the long run. If you do, then it won't cost you as much. Understood.
And I think this is somewhat relevant because I see it a lot in the future space, in traditional finance. But if crypto space becomes fully regulated, the central banks will be controlling all the traffic. Is this not against the ethos of decentralized networks?
Yes, and the question might not necessarily be fully true. So you have different types of regulators, and one of the main focus of a regulator is to address its mind to the areas of highest risk. If you have DeFi projects that can be assessed upfront and are lower risk, regulators are not going to be paying much attention or may even provide for exemptions for certain projects. One of the really good examples may be certain types of microinsurance. So if you have a DeFi project that addresses geographically remote locations and you have some sort of scrutiny and governance and everything else is tested, then not necessarily. And central banks look at currencies and asset flows, but cryptocurrency and digital assets is so much more. So you can have a lot of use of utility tokens or different things that can be light touch, or I prefer right touch regulation. It's not regulation for the sake of regulation. And what's happening right now is a bit of a pendulum swing. Some regulators are going to go a little too far to one side, but it's going to come back centralized. And I think globally in time, we will have that right touch regulation. But right now, it's a bit painful.
Okay. And I guess we'll build off that question. And maybe this has more to do with what DeFi really means. But how can DeFi be regulated if it's fully decentralized? And I think maybe the core portion of that is maybe it's not, but I'll let you handle this one.
Well, it's a really good question, and it's one that I'm engaged on a bit of a debate with different persons who touch the DeFi space from time to time. In my mind, a project can be decentralized, but it could be like a sliding scale. If you have something that has some governance tokens that are built in that allows for the regulator to build that trust and confidence in a particular DeFi project, as you use up those governance tokens, you get to slide more towards a fully decentralized platform. Now, that is my thought and my thought only, and another regulator might have a completely different approach. A true decentralized program and project will definitely evade regulations to some extent, but regulators can be very innovative as well. So I won't say that it's not possible to regulate a DeFi project. We just haven't seen what is possible yet. So, but those are the thoughts in terms of getting at the DeFi projects before they even launch, to maybe implement the governance tokens and different tiers of governance tokens to slide towards a full DeFi when we get confidence in that. That's what I see.
Follow-up question for myself. Does a governance token make you not a security?
Well, in some jurisdictions, yes. In some jurisdictions, no. What percentage of the tokens that you may have would qualify as security? And it goes back to definitions, because if you have certain DeFi projects, for, again, using the micro insurance example, if your primary outcome of the project is to provide insurance coverage to a dispersed community, then I'm not going to be regulating it as a security. I'm going to be focusing on the insurance coverage element of it and the different elements that need to be baked into the protocol that would satisfy insurance, the insurance core principles. So not necessarily, in my view, again, governance tokens in and of themselves do not make for a securities company.
You said percentage?
Well, I said percentage, but when you look at the overall project, it may be that you have a number of tokens that are held back for the project for different purposes. So you want to reward people. And so those aren't governance tokens, but you might have governance tokens to execute on certain decisions. So you're providing insurance, and you're providing, I don't know, insurance for agriculture from disasters or what have you. Then you start to build on. So look at the totality, and we are going to try and map it into, maybe pools would be the better analogy, to see what size of the pool in that DeFi project is dedicated towards governance versus the actual key outcome of the project.
What do you have a fine line or a guesstimate of what percentage regulators look at?
Not really, but again, it comes back down to overall risks. So if our biggest concern is the risk to the underlying policyholders or consumers or the general public, we'll be focused on that. We're not necessarily going to be focused on the other side. We do want to see that competent people are behind the protocol, no criminals, the usual, but we are going to focus on the area that could either create the greatest financial instability or undermine confidence in a market, or could be detrimental to retail or consumers or policyholders. So that's my metrics.
Sounds difficult.
Hey Maddie, if I can pitch in here with a small question for Simone, like what you're talking right now about is like not just complex, it's also like super advanced and also versatile in terms of approach. And you know, just from what we just discussed on the approach of the U.S. regulators, when do you think like actual countries are going to come to sort of regulation on the level that you're talking about right now? Because like I don't see us going into that kind of complexity and versatility in terms of legislation, like even in the next like 5 years. Like no way. Like maybe just my personal opinion on that, but I would love to see where how.
Well, I can't speak for the US. I know that creating laws, from what I've seen from way outside, I have no expertise in the US for regulatory systems and what have you. I know all of the key players and everything, but it seems as though legislation does take a long time. And that's why you have jurisdictions outside of the United States, and smaller jurisdictions tend to be more agile. So we are very responsive in relation to addressing our minds to those nuanced approaches. It does sound complex, but the difference is that in smaller jurisdictions, you tend to be able to be a bit more responsive because the machinery towards getting to that legislation is a lot easier to develop. And in other jurisdictions, we actually have a framework that contemplates a more nimble need for approach. So Paul asked the question, he said, yes, I'm somewhere in the Caribbean, and very good of you to spot Barbados, but I'm in Anguilla. My mom is from Barbados, so a little shout out to Barbados. And I'm from the BVI. So touching a lot of jurisdictions, all of those different jurisdictions, there are a lot of opportunities that I think for the crypto community to come into these jurisdictions to actually get their programs developed and be able to have the proof of concept that this can actually work. And here's that you have regulators that can get it right. What's going on, right? And there are other jurisdictions that can do exactly the same thing. So that is where I see smaller jurisdictions actually also leading the space, because we can be so nimble, and because the crypto community is moving at the speed of light, you need a regulatory response that is almost as close. We are not at the speed of light here, but we are almost as close in comparison to maybe some other jurisdictions.
Okay. So Simone, I kind of have a kind of a response. Maybe you can sort of answer. Let's say you're a US citizen right now, and you're looking to kind of launch a project. Obviously, it's way more of an issue for those people because, as you just said, it's a much bigger machine and it takes longer to kind of get those wheels in motion. What kind of advice could you give in terms of those types of people thinking about looking at jurisdictions like yourself and working with them, and how might that affect them still being a citizen of the US? I mean, that might be a tough question to answer, but I know that's going to be something a lot of people are thinking right now.
I can answer it. And the first thing is, the disclaimer is that I'm not a lawyer. It's not legal advice, and this is not financial advice. So my views,
Gotcha.
But US citizens. So what happens is that because of a lot of the existing laws, a lot of US citizens do find some challenges and some hurdles in terms of setting up their projects. And what happens is that they would incorporate a company in a jurisdiction that is not, and it's not tax neutral, or, the tax havens is a misnomer. It is for a jurisdiction that is that can provide you with a vehicle that would then be able to be regulated in that jurisdiction or another other jurisdictions. So you have the usual jurisdictions: Anguilla, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, what have you. And the element therein lies is the law. That we have the company law where you can establish these projects, but you also have the court system. And in all the jurisdictions I just mentioned, you have the UK court system, which is one of the most trusted court systems on the planet. If a dispute arises, because, business, sometimes there are arguments. And that has been the approach of a number of innovators to incorporate in a jurisdiction. We have really good framework around AML, CFT, and nimble framework. And if the law doesn't exist, that doesn't mean that you can't ask the questions in terms of getting off the ground. And even if you don't have money, millions of dollars sitting down for legal advice in those jurisdictions, sometimes it's pretty easy to find a law firm that is willing to provide some assistance with the understanding that when the project gets off the ground, then they'll get their share. So that would be the approach.
Awesome. So the guys who are hosting the stream, it's about 3 a.m. where they are right now. So I'm just going to go through some rapid fires and then I think we'll wrap it up. We've been going for about 40 minutes. The last question for Simone before we hop into CyberFi. Many firms are adopting cryptocurrencies for remunerating their employees. How do regulatory authorities aim to address the taxation issues related to this? And what are obstacles involved for other firms before this mode of payment go mainstream?
So it's not for the regulator to necessarily address their minds to the taxation element. That's the tax authority. So it's a different body altogether. But in my mind, the tax obligation is that of the person. I do know there's a lot of discussion in the US around Roth IRAs and setting that up to have a portion of your monies go there. So there are some tax advantages that are had in the United States. For other jurisdictions that are, if you're paid in crypto, you're still being paid, and it may be that the taxation legislation has not caught up. Again, this is not legal advice, but it's not something that financial services regulator is immediately concerned about. We do know that people are willing to take their payments in crypto, but because we also know that those persons have to buy coffee and groceries, and the planet is not yet on that scale where you can do that everywhere with crypto, and you would change that over to fiat, you would have to address your mind as to making sure that the individual understands that they're still responsible for their tax obligation.
Awesome. And then we'll go over to CyberFi real quick for some rapid fire. Someone asked, is your token utility or governance?
It's both. I think I think that's the way to go. Like in our case, just the governance. Like I'm pretty kind of very conservative in terms of governance. I just see a lot of projects that use governance. They're still not really, doing it with the power that kind of decentralization kind of brings, because like you still have those 10, 20 wallets controlling all the governance, and in that case scenario, what the hell, right? It's like your token is a governance token, but like there's literally like 20 wallets that make all the decisions. Not super fun, right? In our case, because we're working in such a versatile environment, and we need that feedback from the community, which is done through governance. We're going to implement a very small stake basically for your vote to count in our governance process. So it makes sense. And that's kind of the governance part. But on the utility side, it's just straight up utility, so that there's more incentive to use CFI, and it could accumulate kind of more value, I think, to the users.
Yeah, we had a pretty long discussion on governance as well during the last panel. And if anyone wants to choose to divert their questions to more elaboration on how we can fix governance, I'd be more willing to hear that.
That's a long road.
Yeah. Your last question is, how is CyberFi different from other projects present in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to understand this is that there are automation products, let's say, in the DeFi space. But and let's take Y-Earn as the premier example of that. But the way it's done is that there are entities that are creating these strategies, either through governance or through users that kind of push these good strategies of automation into vaults that users can use. So just in simple words, there's an entity, right? It's decentralized, whatever, but it pushes a certain automation mechanic to the user. That's the approach they're taking. On our side, right, we are doing the opposite. We're giving the user the ability to choose of the Lego blocks, let's say, that they can put together in terms of creating an automation strategy and then deploy that or just use that or whatever. So it's just done from the other side around. Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to connect you with Sam after this call to talk about integration strategies, since you guys seem to be in a very similar spot. All right, moving over to Sam. 3 questions here. What percentage of the total fees will be distributed as rewards?
So all the fees. So
All
the
the
fees
fees?
are always distributed. Yeah, they're not that. In order to change that, that would have to be a governance decision, because I don't want to take away strategists' fees and pull it into a treasury or a fund. That has to be defined by governance. So as of right now, it's 100% redistribution.
Okay. And what's your solution to imperfect governance?
Imperfect governance? Well, I mean, so let's separate governance into 2 separate issues. There's one is operational governance, and then the second one is sort of the regime. So the status quo of governance. One method is by having a minimum participatory governance model, which is what we're going to adopt, where in order to receive any sort of distributions or rewards or whatever, you must at least vote present in a monthly governance call. So once a month, your governance tokens, you must vote present. You can, if there are additional governance proposals on there, you can abstain. You don't have to participate in the actual voting process, but you have to at least commit to being active. And hopefully that, I don't want to force people to vote, but I want to incentivize them to at least be present while we are voting. So
Can they
there's
renew?
do what?
Can they renew? Let's say I miss a month. Can I renew?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not meant to penalize people. It's meant to expose them. Yeah, it's minimally, right? Like, I don't want people to come back a month later. Hey, why wasn't the community informed? Well, we had a vote. Oh, well, I missed it. Oh, well, I'm not on the forums. You know, like, there's a whole plethora of other things you need to involve yourself with in governance, and this is sort of minimizing it to the absolute minimum, to where there's not a good excuse as to why you weren't informed, right? I missed the email.
Yeah, playing devil's advocate there. Don't they call that voter suppression in the United States?
I don't know what that is.
You don't know what voter suppression is? Yeah, I mean, that's funny.
Voter suppression. I mean, we can have a whole sort of talk on voter suppression and sort of who should vote and who shouldn't vote, right? Like, should people who are uninformed vote? What constitutes, eligibility for having the franchise? Like, there's all these sorts of questions, right? But this at least gets you to a good starting place, right? Where you're at least being exposed to the process, and over time, if you want to either delegate your voting, or if you want to actually participate in the actual crafting of protocol resolutions or whatever you're eligible to, and you at least have a baseline, so to speak, of previous exposure, right? Because the last thing any governance system wants is people who have no idea what they're talking about injecting themselves into the conversation with no prior exposure to the decorum or the sort of parliamentary process that governance system uses, and trying to inject their own ideas or beliefs or whatever, right? So it's not meant to be, perfect, because governance is never perfect, but it's aimed more of being agile and not bureaucratic.
Okay. So we're on the last 3 questions here. One for Manifold, one for Bahadler, or 2 for Bahadler. So will there be any features for backtesting of strategy? If yes, how will I get the data?
So yes, there's plenty of information, and that includes data sets. So we have multiple different data providers that we have either a license with, or we do like web scraping and stuff. And we provide that in like a CSV and a JSON format. And then there's also a database that we have, a Postgres database that has that information, in which you'll be able to hook up a Jupyter notebook and be able to query that information. So think of it as like if you've ever used like Google Bigquery, So Google Cloud has a product offering called Bigquery, which is hooked up to an Ethereum, the Ethereum mainnet. So you can extract all the information you want. It's very similar to Dune Analytics. If you've ever used Dune Analytics, it's very similar to that platform. At minimum, you can do like SQL queries to extract the data set that you specifically want. But we have a bunch of data sets already extracted, and then we're working on creating some actual modeling, either using TradingView. So TradingView has a scripting engine called Pine that we're trying to leverage. That way, it's much easier for people who are used to like charting and stuff to iterate versus having to hard code a bunch of actual like Jupyter Notebook models. So it's all about getting iteration done as quickly as possible. So that way we know what to focus on and what not to focus on.
Awesome. And then let's come out to you, Paul, just so we can finalize the session. You had mentioned that that maybe a lot of people don't know about you at this point. You've been out for a little bit. I know a lot of people know about degen.vc, which you're a founder of as well. Maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight of how you plan to expand the community for BHODLer and make it more known to potential future users.
Yeah, so there's alongside the liquidity mining event, there are a number of different kind of marketing and outreach activities that are in the works. So we're taking a very gentle approach to this, because the idea of an AMM built on a token bonding curve might sound a little bit daunting to newcomers into the ecosystem. So a lot of OGs will not necessarily need to be upskilled as much as newcomers would be. So the idea is to produce a lot of informational kind of in data, knowledge bases, those kinds of things, to help people get up the learning curve. And part of that will entail sort of marketing campaigns, more AMAs, more kind of community outreach, just to get people kind of comfortable with the idea and to understand what the differentiating factors are. So plans in the works, nothing will be kind of revealed or massively kind of kicked into gear until we get a firmer timeline on when liquidity mining will start, and then we'll start producing some content.
Awesome. And then the final question, I'll give you the opportunity to comment on impermanent governance.
Yeah, fascinating. In the Medium article that Justin's written, there's I'm gonna kind of paraphrase a little bit from it. So the issue of kind of governance is this provable human identity. So the things that sort of drive BHODLer, like quadratic voting, anonymous juries, dispute resolutions are difficult problems. So the DAO that Justin's developing is called the Morgoth DAO, and it'll have kind of unique identities that correspond to the minions of Morgoth. I'm sure many people will know who they are. I won't run through them, but familiar names like Sauron and Saruman and Smaug and others from obviously the Lord of the Rings novels. And basically, each of these minions will have certain powers, and each of those powers corresponds to a governance action, such as add a token. Some can be transferred between minions, some can be multiplied. They're all controlled by externally owned accounts or contract accounts, and control is subject to various games that include auctions and staking and so on. So we're working on a fascinatingly decentralized governance type of protocol in which there are certain actions can only be done by certain people within that kind of minion structure. At any point, these minions can swap out and experiment with different forms of governance. So as it's described in summary in the article, the Morgoth DAO is a DAO of DAOs. It's sort of a parliament of DAOs as well. So the idea is to decentralize a lot of the decision making into sub organizations. And it's almost a neat way of not clogging the system. I mean, if you look at some of the some of the voting protocols, I won't mention any names. We always hate to kind of comment on competitors, but you see the hundreds of votes that are going on at different times across a range of kind of often intertwined and often, you know, overlapping and often completely irrelevant topics is quite overwhelming, we think, for participants, and decentralizing their actions will make things a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't know if this makes me a nerd, but that was pretty exciting actually to hear about. Normally you just hear about these vanilla governance structures, but you know, you're really taking the time to craft something that's a little bit more passionate and seems to solve a little bit more of the nuances with governance in terms of almost creating like city states, but assumed within the role of JR Token's fantasy world. All right, well,
correct.
I want to just give a strong appreciation out to everyone coming out. Simone, we really appreciate the wonderful oversight straight out of the BVI. Some of my most exciting projects. I mean, the first session was great, but I had a little bit more of a passion for the second session, as I've had some time to work with all four of you, or all three of you, and I look forward to all of your projects coming out. David, do you have anything else you want to add?
I think Simone was just wanted to clarify she's not actually from the BVI, although she did say she had family from there.
I actually am from the BVI.
Yeah, I looked at her LinkedIn. She has 20 years experience there.
Yes, and so I'm on secondment in Anguilla, so it's just more than 100 miles. But I am a citizen and a national, born in the BVI. I'm working right now in Anguilla. Mom is from Barbados, a child of the Caribbean, excited to be in the space, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
No worries, you're representing the Caribbean. That's the main thing. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming on board. It's been a very good second day. I think these sessions are kind of just getting up to the next level. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Matt. This is David. This is TDeFi. Thank you very much, guys. We're going to end it there. Let the guys go back to bed. They're busy in the background.
Yeah, big shout out to the production team. We can end the stream now, but you know, big thank you to all you guys staying the extra time for this very important discussion. It was a wonderful panel, but whoever is controlling the control room, you can shut down the stream for the end of the night and have a nice rest at home and get ready for tomorrow's day 3, which I believe